Hi, everyone. My name is Shelby, and thank you for joining me for today's mini lecture. I want to do two order of business before we begin. One, I have a very scratchy, sore throat today, so if I have to clear my throat or grab a sip of water, I apologize for that really brief interruption. And two, I have two fur babies joining me today, so I apologize again if you hear background noise or if one makes a guest appearance in my screen. So once again, hi, welcome. My name is Shelby. I'm a speech language pathologist. I work for Spalding Rehab, and I am a speech language pathologist doctoral candidate through Mass General Brigham. Today's presentation is titled American Sign Language Linguistics and Sign Language Pathology. We will be discussing the grammar system of American Sign Language, as well as communication disorders in American Sign Language. Today's mini lecture is just that, just little lecture of what I hoped one day to be a larger presentation. So I'll only be filming the first roughly 10 minutes of my presentation today. I would love to share more though in the future if you're interested. If I had a live audience or a virtual audience, I would do a pre-knowledge self-assessment or encourage those participating to complete one. That's what it would look like here and here. Once again, if I had an audience, I would ask people to share their experience when working, to see if they had any experience working with someone who uses American Sign Language or someone with American Sign Language impairment. Throughout today's presentation, I will be saying variations of deaf sign language user or deaf individual. And what I'm referring to as a culturally deaf individual or big D deaf. Obviously, deafness and hard of hearing can be the medical diagnosis, but throughout this presentation, I'll be referring to those who are culturally deaf users of American Sign Language, or typically American Sign Language is either their first or their second language. So today's learning objectives, we will be doing a very brief overview of the 5 grammatical markers of American Sign Language, touching upon communication disorders in American Sign Language. Towards the end of today's lecture, we will be reviewing a case study together and reviewing symptoms and characteristics of someone who presents with sign language pathology. And then the 4th learning objective, I hope that you can take away why this information is important and how learning about communication disorders in a nonverbal or in a gestural language like American Sign Language can help raise awareness and understanding of communication disorders beyond spoken language bias, and how this can enhance current healthcare provision for culturally deaf users of American Sign Language. Right, so why, once again, is this important? Let's just drive it home. There are approximately 5,000 deaf survivors of stroke in the United States, and approximately 1,000 of those survivors will have sign aphasia. Now, I'll get into what sign aphasia is. We also will touch upon sign stuttering and sign dysarthria and apraxia. If you're a sign language pathologist, I hope to be one day, a speech language pathologist, or someone with communication disorder knowledge and experience, then you've heard terms such as dysarthria, apraxia, aphasia, but I bet you never considered what that looks like in a gestural or non-verbal language. So documentation of signed language aphasia exists dating back to the 1800s without any evidence-based practice to date to support sign language therapy. The deaf community is a very vulnerable linguistic and cultural minority group in the United States, and language barriers frequently prevent deaf individuals from seeking preventative care and communicating with their health professionals. Deaf people face the same medical possibilities as hearing people, such as strokes and traumatic brain injuries that can lead to communication impairments like the ones that I previously mentioned. So by participating in today's very mini lecture, we will be learning about the grammatical system of ASL, an overview of communication disorders in ASL, and linguistic considerations when working with ASL users. Let's jump right into our learning blocks, which is the rule-based system of American Sign Language. I bet you never considered, or there are individuals out there who don't consider American Sign Language to be equivalent to spoken languages, and that they are both rule-based systems. Sign language has 5 grammatical markers: sign hand shape, sign location, sign movement, palm orientation, and non-manual markers, which I'll get into briefly. So if you look to the right here of this slide here, we have 3 different signs: dry, ugly, summer. Dry, ugly, summer. So let's take a look at the 5 grammatical markers here. Dry, ugly, and summer have all of the same 5 grammatical markers except one. And by changing one of these grammatical markers, we change the sign meaning. So dry, ugly, summer. We see here the hand shape remains the same. My index finger pointed out. My sign movement is the same, pulling my index finger into like a little crook. Dry, ugly, summer. My palm orientation is the same, and that my palm is facing down. Non-manual markers don't really apply to this sign, but they would be the same. The only thing that changes for dry, ugly, summer is what? My sign location. Dry takes place at the chin. Ugly is under the nose, and summer is at the forehead. By changing one marker, I've changed the whole meaning of the sign. This is really important to consider when we are reviewing or discussing sign language aphasia. What are non-manual markers? There are 3 subtypes here: facial expressions, classifiers, and finger spelling. I'll touch upon each one very briefly. Facial expressions for American Sign Language grammar typically refers to how the eyebrows as well as the lips make specific movements for certain signs or sign categories. And so for this, I'll use questions. When a culturally deaf user of American Sign Language is asking a question, WH questions have furrowed eyebrows. Who, what, when, where. If you're asking a yes, no question, do you want to go play? I raise my eyebrows. And these changes in eyebrow are just signifying differences in linguistic markers as well as linguistic meaning. Classifiers are another subsection of our non-manual markers. They have many different uses. They are different than hand shapes. So a hand shape, once again, was dry, ugly, summer. They often are used to describe the size or the shape of an object, as well as how it may move in time and space. And it shows relationship to others. So an example of that would be here on our next page. This is typically a classifier for maybe a vehicle: car, motorcycle, bus. This classifier typically can apply to movement. I was traveling, and snake, slithers. And then this hand shape is typically regarding like an object, typically drinking, maybe unscrewing, something like that. And then finger spelling. Culturally deaf users finger spell a lot of things. Your name is finger spelled. Like locations like McDonald's would be signed. And then there are also just signs that don't have, there are words that don't have a sign. One of those is bus. There is no sign for bus. This is the sign for car, truck. There's no sign for bus. So we just would finger spell bus, B-U-S. Okay, so let's come into our first knowledge check, little mini quiz. Which of the following is not one of the 5 grammatical markers of American Sign Language? Sign movement, classifiers, sign location, the size of your hand, or palm orientation. This is where in a live lecture, I would ask someone, or I would say, drop your answer in the chat. But for today's purpose, the answer is the size of your hand is not a grammatical marker. And then I would ask, can anyone list all 5 grammatical markers? So sign language pathology, and this is where we're going to start to wrap up this video. This is an image that I took from one of the resources that you've been handed, where language lives in the brain. I'm a speech language pathologist, so this image is very familiar to me. If you're not familiar with this image, basically the colorful sections here are different parts of the brain, the ones that a speech language pathologist as well as sign language experts would be super interested in are Broca's area, Wernicke's area here, as well as the motor cortex, because obviously American Sign Language is a gestural movement-based language. In my experience and through the literature that I have read, there are currently 5 identified communication disorders in American Sign Language. Sign language aphasia, right hemisphere disorder, signed apraxia and ataxia, sign stuttering, and sign dysarthria. The remaining part of this presentation would take a look at each one of these and how those symptoms would present in a sign language user. But unfortunately, that is where I'll be ending today's video. Would love to give further information if you have any questions. Once again, just thank you for joining me for today's presentation. I hope that you've begun to learn something new and have some more questions around this topic. And thank you.